You slept, not 1 hour or 2, all night, 7, 8, maybe 9 hours. And when the alarm went off, or when the body simply woke up, the tiredness was still there. Not the tiredness of someone who didn't sleep, a different tiredness, more diffuse, deeper, as if sleep had happened on the outside. But something on the inside hadn't truly rested. This feeling has a name. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of discipline. It is not a mindset problem. It is the result of a nervous system that spent hours in apparent rest, without entering the physiological state that real rest requires. And understanding the difference between those two things, between sleeping and recovering, completely changes the way you interpret your own body. But to get there, we need to begin with a question most people never ask. What exactly should sleep be doing for you? Not in the general sense of resting, in the precise physiological, neurological sense. What does the organism expect to happen during the hours you spend unconscious? Because if you don't know what sleep should be producing, you have no way of noticing when it isn't producing that. And when you don't notice, you keep sleeping the same way, waiting for results that never arrive, and interpreting the persistent exhaustion as something that is wrong with you, when what is wrong is the context in which sleep is happening. Human sleep is not a uniform state of unconsciousness. It is an active process, structured in cycles, with distinct phases that serve radically different functions, and the sequence of those phases, the depth to which each is reached, and the number of complete cycles that occur during the night, determine not only whether you wake up rested, they determine the state of your immune system the following morning, the level of cognitive clarity you will have, the hormonal regulation that will govern your mood, your hunger, your capacity to handle stress, and something that is rarely said directly, the emotional state with which you will meet the day. There is an architecture to sleep, a structure most people have never clearly visualized, and that, once it becomes visible, explains with precision why waking up tired is not a question of how many hours you slept. It is a question of the quality of the architecture that occurred during those hours. During a typical night, the organism moves through between 4 and 6 sleep cycles. Each cycle lasts an average of 90 minutes, and each cycle contains a sequence of phases that deepen progressively before returning to the surface. These phases are divided into 2 broad categories: NREM sleep, non-rapid eye movement, which is subdivided into 3 stages of increasing depth, and REM sleep, rapid eye movement, which occurs predominantly in the second half of the night. Each category has specific functions. Each stage serves a purpose that cannot be replaced by the others. And when the architecture is compromised, when certain stages are suppressed, fragmented, or fail to reach the necessary depth, those functions are not fulfilled, and the organism wakes with deficits that an outside observer, and frequently the person themselves, cannot see, but feels. In the heavy body, in the slow thinking, in the irritability with no apparent cause, in the feeling that sleeping made no difference. The deepest stage of NREM sleep, called slow-wave sleep or delta sleep, is where something happens that no human technology has yet been able to replicate. The glymphatic system activates. This system, discovered only in 2013 by neuroscientist Maiken Nedergaard and her team at the University of Rochester, is a network of channels surrounding the blood vessels of the brain. During slow-wave sleep, the glial cells that make up this system contract, creating spaces between them that are immediately filled by cerebrospinal fluid. That fluid flows through the created spaces, carrying with it the metabolic waste that accumulated during hours of neural activity. Among that waste are proteins that, when not adequately removed over time, are associated with neurodegenerative conditions, beta amyloid, tau, proteins whose progressive accumulation is an early marker of cognitive impairment. Deep sleep is not only rest, it is the only window of time in which the brain performs its own cleaning, its own maintenance process, its removal of everything that accumulated during the waking day. And when this stage is suppressed, fragmented, or simply does not reach the necessary depth, that cleaning does not happen completely. The waste remains. The system wakes more overloaded than when it went to sleep. And the mental fog many people describe upon waking is not a metaphor. It is a real physiological representation of what happened during the night. But there is something beyond the brain's cleaning that slow-wave sleep should be producing. Something that involves hormones, muscle recovery, the immune system, and a specific function that connects deep sleep with the state of alertness you will carry into the next day. A function that begins to reveal why sleep without adequate architectural quality does not only leave you tired, it leaves you more vulnerable, more reactive, and less capable of handling what the day will bring. During slow-wave sleep, the pituitary gland releases approximately 70% of the organism's daily dose of growth hormone, not only in children, in adults too. This hormone does not serve only physical growth, it is the primary regulator of repair and recovery processes in the adult organism. Muscle repair, protein synthesis, tissue regeneration, glucose metabolism regulation, immune system strengthening. When deep sleep is adequate, this repair process happens completely. The organism wakes literally more restored at the cellular level than when it went to sleep. When deep sleep is inadequate, growth hormone release is compromised. Repair processes are left incomplete. The organism wakes with a recovery deficit that shows up on no test, but shows up in the feeling of a heavy body, in reduced physical performance, in slower muscle recovery, in lower immunity, in the feeling that the body did not renew itself during the night. But there is something even more specific that connects sleep architecture to the emotional and mental state you wake with. There is a bidirectional relationship between deep sleep and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. This axis is the organism's central stress response system. It is what regulates cortisol production. Under conditions of adequate sleep, deep sleep signals the HPA axis that the stress of the previous day has been processed and that cortisol levels can remain low during the night. This nocturnal suppression of cortisol is what allows the autonomic nervous system to transition into the parasympathetic state, what allows the immune system to carry out its nighttime functions, what allows the brain to process emotional experiences without the interference of stress hormones. But when deep sleep is inadequate, the HPA axis does not receive the suppression signal. Cortisol levels remain elevated during the night. And instead of a nocturnal cycle of recovery, the organism experiences a continuous cycle of low-level activation, which leaves the system more reactive the following morning, more sensitive to stress, with a lower activation threshold for situations that would normally be tolerable, and with a feeling of exhaustion that does not match the number of hours slept. Because the problem was never the quantity of hours, it was what happened inside them. Now here is something that connects all of this to a dimension that goes beyond physiology. There is a fundamental law that governs the biological rhythm of all living organisms on Earth. It is called the circadian rhythm, and most people understand the circadian rhythm as the sleep-wake cycle. But it is far more than that. The circadian rhythm is a temporal synchronization system that governs virtually every physiological process in the organism. Body temperature, blood pressure, hormonal secretion, digestion, immune function, cell division, cognitive capacity, emotional regulation. All of these processes have their own temporal rhythm. A peak, a trough, a moment when they function with greatest efficiency, and a moment when they need less activity in order to carry out their maintenance processes. This system is regulated by a biological clock located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, a structure of only 20,000 neurons that coordinates the rhythms of virtually every one of the trillions of cells in the organism, and that uses light as its primary calibration signal. Daylight tells the system that it is time to activate. Darkness tells the system that it is time to recover. But here is something that is rarely stated clearly enough. This system was calibrated for sunlight, for the natural cycle of intense light during the day and darkness during the night, and the current environment in which most people live, with artificial light available 24 hours a day, with exposure to screens that emit specific wavelengths of light, with indoor environments that never become completely dark, and with routines that invert or fragment the natural cycle of light and darkness, creates a chronic desynchronization between the biological clock and the external environment. This desynchronization has a precise name. It is called social jet lag, and its effects are not only fragmented sleep, they are reduced insulin sensitivity, compromised immune function, altered hormonal production rhythms, reduced quality of deep sleep, and something especially relevant to what we are exploring: a reduction in the capacity of the nervous system to regulate the emotional response to stress. Because when the biological clock is desynchronized, the processes that should happen during the night do not happen at the moments when the organism is physiologically prepared to carry them out. And even sleeping the theoretically adequate number of hours, sleep does not produce the results it should, because the processes that depend on the circadian rhythm need to happen at the right moment in the cycle, not just during a sufficient number of hours of unconsciousness. And this begins to reveal something that goes far beyond sleep hygiene. Something that involves the way the nervous system learned to use sleep, or to resist it, and why, for some systems, even when all external conditions seem adequate, sleep still does not restore what needs to be restored. There is a distinction that most research on sleep does not make clearly enough: the distinction between sleep as an event and sleep as a context. Sleep as an event is the perspective most people have: a bounded period of time, a number of hours, a figure on a monitoring app, a metric. Sleep as a context is something entirely different. It is the state of the nervous system within which sleep is happening. And that difference is fundamental, because two organisms can sleep the same number of hours, in the same bed, in the same external environment, and experience radically different sleep architectures, depending on the state of the nervous system that is sustaining that sleep. A regulated nervous system, a system that can adequately transition into the parasympathetic state, that does not carry excessive allostatic load, that is not operating with a chronically activated HPA axis, will produce sleep with complete cycles, well-defined deep stages, and abundant, consolidated REM sleep, a nervous system in a state of chronic vigilance. Even when physically lying down in a dark and quiet environment, will produce shallower sleep, with more partial awakenings, less time in deep stages, and fragmented REM sleep. And the difference between those two sleep profiles shows up not only in how you wake, it shows up in cognitive capacity throughout the day, in emotional processing, in decision-making, in the regulation of attention, in speed of response, in the feeling of presence or absence within the day itself. There is a concept that deepens this distinction in a fascinating way. It is called REM sleep debt. When REM sleep is chronically insufficient, the organism accumulates a deficit of emotional processing, not as a metaphor, as a real physiological process. The emotional experiences that should have been reprocessed during REM are not fully integrated. They remain with their original emotional charge intact, or with reduced charge but not completely neutralized, and this accumulation has very specific consequences. The same situation that would be tolerable for someone without REM sleep debt generates a more intense emotional response in someone with accumulated deficit, not because the person is weaker, but because the processing that should have reduced the emotional charge of that situation did not happen. It is like trying to process the 20th difficult situation of the week with the same system that processed the previous 19, without having had the opportunity to empty the load between them. And this creates something many people recognize but rarely manage to name with precision: an emotional reactivity that feels disproportionate, a feeling that small things cost more than they should, a background irritability with no identifiable cause, a reduced capacity to find perspective in difficult situations, not because something is wrong with the person, but because the emotional processing system is operating at reduced capacity, with reservoirs that were never completely emptied, with accumulated load that no amount of low-quality sleep can dissipate. There is something in this picture that is rarely discussed with the depth it deserves: the chronobiology of the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, responsible for the state of alertness, the fight or flight response, and the general activation of the organism, has its own circadian rhythm. In people with a regulated system, sympathetic activity is naturally lower during the night. It allows the parasympathetic system to take over. It allows recovery processes to occur, and it rises again in the early morning hours, preparing the organism for the day. But in people with a chronically hyperactivated nervous system, that rhythm becomes distorted. nocturnal sympathetic activity remains higher than it should. The transition to parasympathetic dominance is incomplete, and the organism spends the night in a state that is physiologically closer to attentive wakefulness than to deep rest. This is not visible externally. The person is lying down, the eyes are closed, possibly snoring, apparently sleeping. But internally, the autonomic nervous system is maintaining a level of activation that compromises the depth of the sleep stages, that fragments cycles before they complete, that prevents delta sleep from reaching the amplitude necessary to adequately activate the glymphatic system. That reduces the quantity and quality of REM sleep. There are measurable physiological markers of this state. Heart rate variability, known as HRV, is one of them. In quality sleep, HRV is high. The cardiovascular system is responding in a flexible and adaptive way. The parasympathetic nervous system is dominant. In low-quality sleep associated with sympathetic hyperactivation, HRV is low. The cardiovascular system is operating more rigidly. The nervous system is in a state that does not correspond to the rest that the number of hours suggests. And here is something that completely transforms the way of understanding chronic fatigue. The organism not only feels the REM sleep debt, it tries to compensate for it. When there is an opportunity to sleep without the commitments of the day, when a weekend allows sleeping more than usual, the organism attempts to recover prioritarily the REM sleep that was missing during the week. This is called REM rebound, and it is why more vivid and intense dreams tend to occur when sleeping more than usual, not by chance, because the system is trying to complete the processing that was left pending. But REM rebound is not a solution, it is an attempt at partial compensation, because the emotional processing that should have happened night by night cannot be completely replaced by a concentration of REM over 2 days. The events that occurred during the week continue without their adequate processing. The accumulated load remains in the system, and the Monday cycle of returning to the week without having recovered what should have been recovered repeats itself, week after week, month after month, creating a progressive accumulation that the numbers of hours slept never capture. And that explains why people who sleep enough still feel that sleep is not working, because sleep is happening, but recovery is not. And the difference between the two is exactly what this video was built to make visible. There is still a deeper layer in this process, one that involves not only the physiology of sleep, but what the nervous system learned about the meaning of resting, and why that learning, accumulated over time, may be the most determining factor of all for sleep quality. There is something that most approaches to sleep quality ignore completely. They treat sleep as a problem of input and output. Input, adequate conditions, the correct number of hours, sleep hygiene. Output, restorative sleep, as if the organism were a passive system that simply responds to external conditions. But the nervous system is not passive, it is active. And what it does with the sleep conditions you create depends fundamentally on how it learned to use rest. There is a concept that rarely appears in discussions about sleep, but that is central to understanding why some people cannot recover regardless of external conditions. It is called nocturnal cortical hyperexcitability. In people with a chronically activated nervous system, certain regions of the cerebral cortex maintain higher levels of activity during sleep than in people with a regulated system. Not throughout the entire night, at specific moments, especially during transitions between stages. During the moments when the system should be deepening the level of unconsciousness, there is an involuntary recruitment of cortical activity that fragments the process. This is not conscious. The person does not decide to wake up, does not notice that this is happening, but the result is visible in the sleep profile. More micro-awakenings, less time in deep sleep, a greater proportion of total sleep in superficial stages, and a sleep architecture that produces less recovery than the number of hours suggests. But here is what transforms this understanding. Nocturnal cortical hyperexcitability is not only a symptom of the activated nervous system, it is also a consequence of the sleep history of the system itself. Each night of fragmented sleep that did not produce adequate recovery, each morning of waking tired despite having slept, creates an association in the system. The association that sleeping does not restore, that lying down is not safe enough to fully relax, that sleep is a state of vulnerability that will not produce the expected result. And that association like all associations learned by the nervous system, begins to influence what happens during sleep. The system enters sleep with a residual level of vigilance, not to protect against external threats, but because it learned that sleep itself is not completely trustworthy, and that residual level of vigilance, however small it may be, is enough to reduce the depth of the stages and fragment the cycles, creating exactly the low-quality sleep that reinforced the original association. It is a cycle of negative learning that sustains itself, that gradually worsens, and that does not respond to interventions that address only external conditions. There is a field of study that addresses specifically this aspect of sleep. It is called cognitive behavioral sleep medicine, and one of its fundamental principles is that sleep quality is not determined only by physiological factors. It is determined by the relationship the nervous system learned to have with sleep, with the state of rest, with the vulnerability of deep relaxation, with what emerges when consciousness diminishes and control is temporarily suspended, and rebuilding that relationship, not through techniques that try to force sleep, but through repeated experiences that update what the system learned about what sleep can be, is a fundamental part of the path towards sleep that truly restores. But there is something even more specific that needs to be said. There is a restoration window that slow-wave sleep produces. In the first hours of the night, when homeostatic sleep pressure is at its peak, when the propensity for deep sleep is greatest, when the system is most inclined to deepen the stages. If that window is interrupted by external stimuli, by awakenings, by involuntary cortical activity, it cannot be completely recovered afterward. The sleep of the last hours of the night has a different composition, more REM, less deep sleep. And although both phases are necessary, the deficit of deep sleep in the first hours is not compensated by sleep in the last hours. They are different functions, at different moments, with different biochemical conditions. And this has a very concrete practical implication. Waking 1 hour earlier does not only lose 1 hour of sleep, it preferentially loses REM sleep from the final hours. Going to bed 1 hour later does not only delay the start of sleep, it compresses the first hours where deep sleep would be most abundant. Timing matters, not only duration, and timing is governed by the circadian rhythm, by the cycle of body temperature, by patterns of melatonin and cortisol, by a biological architecture with its own temporal logic. And that, when respected, creates the conditions for sleep to produce what it was built to produce. Now think about what this means for someone who wakes up tired despite having slept. Sleep happened, but perhaps not in the windows where it would be most effective. Perhaps not with the depth that recovery functions require. Perhaps not with the continuity that complete cycles need. Perhaps with a residual level of vigilance that prevented the most restorative stages. And the message the body sends the following morning is not that you slept in the wrong way. It is that the system has not yet received what it needs to truly recover. That is information, not a failure. And information, once understood, already begins to change the relationship with what is happening. Because what was learned can be updated. The system that learned to associate sleep with vigilance can, through repeated and consistent experiences, begin to learn that sleep can be a different place, a place where the system does not need to monitor, where it can deepen, where it can, finally, do what it was built to do: restore, clean, process, prepare the system for what comes next. If any part of what was said here resonated, not because your sleep is broken, but because the system that sustains sleep learned something that has not yet been updated, and what can be named is already being processed differently. Leave something in the comments if you'd like. A sentence, a perception. What stayed after this video? There is still something about this cycle that was not explored here. Why the system, even when it begins to sleep better, even when the nights start to feel different, can still wake with a feeling that is not exactly tiredness. It is something more subtle, a kind of weight that sleep doesn't reach, something that doesn't come from the night. It comes from within the calm that the day has not yet learned to offer.